The gunshot echoed across the mesa, just as the sun began its descent behind the red rocks of New Mexico territory. And Faith Morrison knew that sound meant someone was dying or already dead. She had been gathering firewood near her small homestead outside Lordsburg when the crack split the evening air. Faith dropped the bundle of mesquite branches and lifted her skirts, running toward the sound without thinking. Her late father had always said her compassionate heart would get her into trouble someday, but at 22 years old, Faith had never learned to turn away from suffering. The desert stretched before her in shades of orange and gold, the September heat of 1882 still radiating from the sand despite the approaching dusk. As she crested a small rise, Faith saw him. A man lay sprawled near a cluster of prickly pear cacti, his shirt dark with blood. His horse stood several yards away, reins trailing in the dirt. Faith rushed forward and dropped to her knees beside him, her hands immediately going to his neck to check for a pulse. It was there, but weak and fluttering like a trapped bird. The man was older, perhaps in his 50s, with gray threading through his dark hair. His eyes flickered open, unfocused and glazed with pain. Blood seeped from a wound in his chest, spreading across the sand beneath him. "Easy now," Faith said softly, pulling off her shawl and pressing it against the wound. "Save your strength." "Ambushed," the man rasped, blood flecking his lips. "Took everything. Should have seen them coming." Faith looked around frantically, but whoever had done this was long gone. The sun was sinking fast, and she knew she could not move him alone. The wound was too severe. Even as she pressed harder, trying to staunch the bleeding, she could feel death approaching like a shadow. "I am going to stay with you," Faith said firmly, though her voice trembled. "You will not be alone." The man's eyes found hers, and something like gratitude flickered there. "Kind girl," he whispered. "Too kind for this hard country." Faith kept pressure on the wound, talking to him softly about nothing and everything. She told him about her small homestead, about the chickens she kept and the garden she was trying to coax from the stubborn earth. She told him how her parents had died of fever 2 years ago, leaving her alone but determined to make their dream of a life in New Mexico work. She talked until her throat was dry and the stars began to appear overhead, and still she held his hand as his breathing grew more and more shallow. "What is your name?" she asked gently. Ezra Sullivan." His voice was barely audible now. "Got a daughter, somewhere back east." "Never told her I loved her enough." "I am sure she knows," Faith said, tears streaming down her face. "I am sure she knows." Ezra Sullivan died just as the moon rose full and bright over the desert, his hand growing still in Faith's grasp. She sat there for a long moment, her shawl soaked with his blood, and said a prayer for his soul. Then she stood on shaking legs and tried to figure out what to do next. She could not leave him for the coyotes, but she also could not carry him alone. That was when she heard the horse. Faith spun around, her heart hammering. A rider approached at a steady pace, silhouetted against the rising moon. She had no weapon, no way to defend herself if this was one of the men who had killed Ezra Sullivan. But something told her to stand her ground, to wait and see. As the rider drew closer, Faith could make out more details. He sat tall in the saddle, his broad-brimmed hat shadowing his face. He wore the practical clothes of a working cowboy, dusty boots in worn stirrups, a rifle in a scabbard at his side. When he was close enough, he reined in his bay, gelding, and dismounted in one fluid motion. "Saw the buzzards circling earlier," he said, his voice deep and measured. "Figured I'd check what drew them." He paused, taking in the scene. "You hurt?" Faith shook her head, finding her voice. "Not my blood. This man, Ezra Sullivan, he was shot. I heard it from my homestead and came running, but I was too late to save him. I have been sitting with him so he would not die alone." The cowboy moved closer, and the moonlight caught his face. He was younger than she had first thought, perhaps 27 or 28, with dark hair that brushed his collar and eyes that seemed almost black in the dim light. His jaw was strong, shadowed with several days of stubble, and there was a hardness to his features that spoke of a difficult life. But when he looked at her, something in his expression softened. "That was kind of you," he said quietly. "Not many would do that for a stranger." "I could not leave him to die alone in the dirt," Faith said simply. The cowboy studied her for a long moment, as if trying to understand what manner of woman would kneel in the desert beside a dying man until the very end. Then he moved to the body, checking Ezra's pockets with practiced efficiency. "Papers here say he was a prospector from Silver City, had a claim up in the hills." The cowboy stood, his expression grim. "Probably why he was killed. Someone wanted to know where his strike was." "That is horrible," Faith whispered. "That is the territory," the cowboy replied, "beautiful and brutal in equal measure." He glanced at her. "I am Marcus Tanner. I work cattle for the Bar T Ranch about 10 miles south of Lordsburg. You said you heard the shot from your homestead." "Yes." "I am Faith Morrison. I have a small place about a mile from here." Marcus looked at the sky, then back at her. "Getting dark. You should not be out here alone. I will help you take Mr. Sullivan into town, and then I will ride you home." Faith wanted to argue that she could manage on her own, but the truth was she would be grateful for the help. Together, they lifted Ezra Sullivan's body across his own horse, securing it as best they could. Marcus worked with quiet efficiency, his movements sure and respectful. As they began the walk back toward her homestead, leading the horses, Faith found herself stealing glances at Marcus Tanner. There was something about him that felt solid, reliable. He moved through the desert darkness like he belonged to it, never stumbling, always aware of his surroundings. "Have you lived out here long?" Marcus asked, breaking the comfortable silence. 2 years. My parents and I came out from Missouri in 1880. They died of fever that first winter, and I stayed to keep their dream alive." Faith swallowed hard. "Some folks think I am foolish for trying to manage alone." "Are you managing?" "Barely, but I am managing nonetheless." Marcus nodded as if that made perfect sense to him. "Takes strength to stay when you could have gone back east. Most people would have run." "Where would I run to?" "Missouri held nothing for me but memories. At least here, I am building something, even if it is small." They reached her homestead as these words left her lips. It was humble, just a small adobe house her father had built with help from some Mexican neighbors, a chicken coop, a lean-to for her 2 goats, and a garden plot surrounded by a fence to keep out the rabbits. A single lantern burned in the window, left lit to guide her home. "You stay here," Marcus said. "I will take Mr. Sullivan into town and report his death to the sheriff. I will make sure he gets a proper burial." "Let me give you some money," Faith said, reaching for the small purse at her waist. Marcus held up a hand. "Keep your money, I will take care of it." "But you do not even know him, and I was the one who found him." "You sat with him while he died. That is worth more than paying for a pine box." Marcus gathered the reins of both horses. "Lock your door tonight. Whoever killed Mr. Sullivan might still be around." Faith felt a chill run down her spine. She had been so focused on the dying man that she had not really considered the danger might still be present. "Thank you, Mr. Tanner." "Marcus," he corrected. He looked at her for a long moment, something unreadable in his dark eyes. "You did a good thing tonight, Miss Morrison. Do not let anyone tell you different." Then he swung up into his saddle and rode off into the darkness, leading Ezra Sullivan's horse behind him. Faith stood watching until the sound of hoofbeats faded, then went inside and barred the door as he had suggested. She did not sleep well that night. Every sound made her jump. Every coyote howl seemed closer than it should. But more than fear, she kept thinking about Marcus Tanner and the way he had looked at her, like she was something rare and precious in this hard land. The next day dawned clear and hot. Faith went about her usual chores, feeding the chickens and goats, tending her garden, but her mind kept wandering to the events of the previous evening. She wondered if Marcus had made it to town safely, if the sheriff had questions for her, if they would find the men who killed Ezra Sullivan. She was drawing water from her well when she saw the rider approaching. Her heart leaped, then settled when she recognized Marcus Tanner's bay gelding. He rode into her yard around midday, and she noticed he had cleaned up since the night before. His face was shaved, his clothes brushed free of trail dust. "Miss Morrison," he said, touching the brim of his hat as he dismounted. "Mr. Tanner, I was not expecting to see you again so soon. Marcus, please." He pulled something from his saddlebag. "I spoke to the sheriff last night. He's going to look into Mr. Sullivan's death, though he was not hopeful about finding the killers. The territory is too big, too many places to hide." He held out a leather pouch. This was in Mr. Sullivan's things, money and a letter addressed to his daughter back in Philadelphia. "I thought you might want to help me see it gets to her." Faith took the pouch, feeling the weight of coins inside. "Why me?" "Because you cared enough to sit with him, because you gave him comfort in his last moments. His daughter should know that, and I figured you could write the letter better than I could." Faith felt tears prick her eyes. "That is very thoughtful of you." Marcus shifted his weight, suddenly seeming less sure of himself. "There is something else. I have been thinking about you out here alone. It is not safe, especially after what happened to Mr. Sullivan. Those men could come back, could see your homestead and decide to rob you too." "I have managed this long," Faith said, though she appreciated his concern. "I know you have, and I am not saying you are not capable. But I would feel better if I could check on you now and then. Make sure everything is all right." He paused. "If that would be acceptable to you." Faith looked at him, this cowboy who had appeared in her life less than a day ago. There was something genuine in his offer, nothing presumptuous or improper. Just a man wanting to help, moved by her kindness to a dying stranger. "I think that would be acceptable," she said softly. Marcus smiled, and it transformed his whole face. "Good. I work the range most days, but I could stop by in the evenings a few times a week. Make sure your fences are sound, check for tracks, that kind of thing. I would appreciate that very much." They stood there in her yard, the sun beating down on them, and Faith felt something shift in her chest. It was too soon to call it attraction, too new to be anything but the smallest spark. But it was there nonetheless, warm and unexpected. Marcus stayed for another hour, checking her fences like he had promised and fixing a weak post in her chicken coop. Faith brought him water and they talked, easy conversation that flowed like they had known each other longer than a day. He told her about growing up in Texas, about learning to work cattle from his father, about coming to New Mexico territory 3 years ago looking for a fresh start. "What were you running from?" Faith asked, then immediately regretted the question. "I am sorry, that was too personal." "No, it is all right." Marcus took a long drink of water. "I was not running from anything, really, more like running towards something. I wanted to make my own way, not just follow in my father's footsteps. He had a ranch in Texas, and everyone expected me to take it over someday. But I wanted to see what I could build on my own first." "Have you found what you were looking for?" Marcus looked at her, and there was something in his eyes that made her breath catch. "I am starting to think I might have." He left shortly after, promising to return in 2 days. Faith watched him ride away, then went inside to compose the letter to Ezra Sullivan's daughter. She poured her heart into it, describing how she had found him and how he had spoken of his daughter in his final moments. She wrote about sitting with him so he would not die alone, about his last words. When she was finished, she felt drained but also at peace. His daughter deserved to know her father had not died alone and forgotten in the desert. Marcus returned 2 days later as promised, and then again 3 days after that. Each time he stayed a little longer, helping with chores and talking. Faith found herself looking forward to his visits, watching the horizon in the early evening for the sight of his bay gelding. He brought her things sometimes, a bag of sugar from town, some nails for her fence, a book he thought she might enjoy. Small gifts that showed he was thinking of her. 3 weeks after they met, Marcus arrived earlier than usual. The sun was still high in the sky when Faith heard his horse. She came out to greet him and saw that he looked troubled. "What is wrong?" she asked immediately. "Sheriff found the men who killed Ezra Sullivan. They were holed up in an old line shack north of here. When the sheriff and his deputies tried to take them in, they drew their guns." Marcus removed his hat, running a hand through his hair. "All 3 of them are dead. There was a shootout." Faith felt a complex mix of emotions. Relief that the killers were caught, sadness at more death, fear at how close danger had been. "Did the sheriff get hurt?" "One of his deputies took a bullet in the shoulder, but he will live." Marcus stepped closer. "Faith, one of those men had been watching your place. The sheriff found drawings in their things, a map showing your homestead. They were planning to rob you next." The blood drained from Faith's face. "Oh God!" Marcus reached out and took her hand, the first time he had touched her beyond helping her over rough ground. His palm was warm and calloused, his grip gentle but strong. "They cannot hurt you now, but I want to ask you something and I need you to really think about it before you answer. All right, let me stay here. Not in the house, I would never suggest anything improper. But let me build a small room onto your lean-to, make it into a proper barn with a space for me. I can help with the heavy work, keep watch, make sure you are safe. I will pay you room and board from my wages." Faith stared at him, her heart pounding. It was an unusual arrangement, but not unheard of in the territory. Many single women took in boarders, and Marcus was proposing something entirely respectable. But she also knew what people would say, the gossip it might start. "I know it is asking a lot," Marcus continued. "And I know it might cause talk in town. But Faith, I cannot stop thinking about you out here alone. Especially now, knowing those men had you marked. Please let me help." Faith thought about the long nights alone, about the constant vigilance required to survive in this hard country. She thought about Marcus and how safe she felt when he was near, how much she had come to treasure their conversations. She thought about the way her heart lifted when she saw him riding toward her homestead. "Yes," she said. "Yes, you can stay." Marcus's face broke into a smile that made him look years younger. "Thank you. I promise you will not regret this." He was true to his word. The very next day, Marcus arrived with lumber and tools. He worked tirelessly, expanding the lean-to into a proper barn with a small but comfortable room at one end. Faith helped where she could, holding boards steady while he nailed them in place, bringing him water and food while he worked under the hot sun. It took him a week to complete the work, a week during which Faith learned more about Marcus Tanner. She learned that he was methodical and patient, never rushing a job but always making steady progress. She learned that he hummed while he worked, old cattle drive songs that drifted across her yard. She learned that he had a dry sense of humor that caught her off guard and made her laugh more than she had since her parents died. And Marcus learned about Faith too. He learned that she rose before dawn every morning and said a prayer before starting her day. He learned that she could not carry a tune to save her life, but sang anyway while working in her garden. He learned that she was stubborn and determined, refusing help with anything she thought she could manage alone, even when it would have been easier to accept his assistance. He learned that her kindness extended to every living thing, from the chickens she named and talked to as if they were people, to the rabbits that tried to eat her garden, which she shooed away rather than shooting. On the evening Marcus moved into his new room, Faith cooked a special dinner to mark the occasion. She made beef stew with vegetables from her garden and biscuits that were only slightly burned on the bottom. They sat outside as the sun set, eating and talking, and it felt natural and right to have him there. "I mailed the letter to Mr. Sullivan's daughter this morning," Marcus said, "and sent along his money and papers. I hope it brings her some comfort." "I hope so too. Though I cannot imagine learning your father died so far from home. She might come west to claim his mining stake. The assayer said Mr. Sullivan had found a decent silver vein." Faith was quiet for a moment. "Do you think I did the right thing, sitting with him instead of running for help?" Marcus set down his plate and looked at her intently. "Faith, you gave a dying man comfort and dignity in his last moments. There was no help close enough to save him, and if you had left to try, he would have died alone and scared. What you did was exactly right, and it says everything about who you are." "I just could not leave him," Faith said softly. "My father died while I was fetching water. I was only gone 10 minutes, but when I came back he was already gone. I always regretted that I was not there, that he died alone. I could not let that happen to someone else if I could help it." Marcus reached across the space between them and took her hand again. This time it felt less like comfort and more like something deeper, a connection forming. "You have the kindest heart of anyone I have ever met. This territory is full of people who have been hardened by the life out here, who only look out for themselves. But you are different. You are like water in the desert." Faith felt tears in her eyes. "That is the nicest thing anyone has ever said to me." They sat there holding hands as the stars came out, neither wanting to break the moment. Finally, reluctantly, Marcus stood. "I should let you get some rest. But thank you for dinner and for letting me stay. I know it was not an easy decision. Thank you for caring enough to ask." Over the following weeks, they fell into a rhythm. Marcus would head out early to work the range for the bar tea, returning in the late afternoon. He would help Faith with the heavy chores, chopping wood or repairing things that needed a strong back and skilled hands. Faith would cook dinner, always making enough for both of them. They would eat together, talking about their days, and then Marcus would retire to his room in the barn while Faith went into the house. It was proper and respectful, but there was also a growing tension between them, something unspoken but deeply felt. Faith found herself thinking about Marcus constantly. The way he looked in the early morning light, his shirt sleeves rolled up as he worked. The sound of his voice when he read aloud from the books they shared. The rare smile that transformed his serious face into something boyish and beautiful. And Marcus was equally captivated by Faith. He loved watching her tend her garden, the gentle way she coaxed life from the hard ground. He loved her laugh, bright and unexpected. He loved her strength, the way she never complained about the difficult life she had chosen. He loved everything about her, and the realization both thrilled and terrified him. One evening in late October, after they had been living on the same property for nearly a month, Marcus finally found the courage to speak what was in his heart. They were sitting outside, the air finally cool after months of brutal heat. Faith had a shawl around her shoulders, and she looked so beautiful in the firelight that Marcus felt his chest tighten. "Faith, I need to talk to you about something." She looked up from the mending in her lap. "That sounds serious." "It is. It is the most serious thing I have ever said." Marcus took a deep breath. "When I first saw you kneeling in the dirt beside a dying stranger, holding his hand and giving him comfort, something in my chest cracked open. I have spent the last 3 years keeping people at a distance, never staying in one place too long, never letting anyone get close. But you changed that. Faith set down her mending, her heart racing. Marcus, let me finish, please. I need to say this. He moved closer, taking both of her hands in his. These past weeks living here, seeing you every day, talking with you every night, it has been the happiest time of my life. You are everything I never knew I was looking for. You are kind and strong and brave and beautiful. And I am in love with you, Faith Morrison, completely and hopelessly in love with you. Tears streamed down Faith's face. Oh, Marcus, I love you too. I have loved you since that first night when you helped me with Mr. Sullivan, when you promised to take care of his burial. I have loved you through every conversation, every shared meal, every moment. I love you so much it scares me. Marcus pulled her into his arms, holding her close. Faith buried her face in his chest, feeling his heart pound against her cheek. They stayed like that for a long moment, just holding each other, letting the truth of their feelings settle between them. When Marcus finally pulled back, he cupped Faith's face in his hands. I want to marry you. I want to spend my life with you, here on this land you love, building something together. I do not have much to offer except my hands and my heart and a promise that I will love you every day for the rest of my life. That is everything, Faith whispered. That is more than everything. Marcus leaned down slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted. But Faith rose to meet him, and when their lips touched, it felt like coming home. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, but then deepened into something that spoke of all the longing and love they had been holding back. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Marcus rested his forehead against hers. Is that a yes? Faith laughed, the sound pure joy. Yes, yes, I will marry you. They made plans that very night, sitting close together, hands entwined. They would go into Lordsburg the next day and speak to the circuit preacher who came through once a month. They would be married as soon as it could be arranged. Marcus would officially move into the house, and they would work the land together. He would continue working for the bar tea, but he would use his wages to improve the homestead, to build the life Faith's parents had dreamed of. The next morning, they rode into Lordsburg together. It was Faith's first time visiting town in weeks, and she noticed the curious looks people gave them. Marcus Tanner and the Morrison girl riding in together. She knew there would be talk, but she did not care. Let them gossip. She was going to marry the man she loved. The circuit preacher, Reverend Matthews, was indeed in town. He was an elderly man with kind eyes who listened to their story with a smile. I would be honored to marry you young people. How about Saturday? That gives you 3 days to prepare. 3 days seemed both impossibly short and unbearably long. Faith and Marcus spent the time getting ready. Faith had no family to invite, and Marcus had no one nearby, so it would be a small ceremony. But Faith wanted to look nice, so she used some of her carefully hoarded money to buy fabric and spent her evenings sewing a simple but pretty dress in a soft blue color. Marcus used the time to buy supplies for improving the homestead. He purchased chickens to expand Faith's flock, seeds for a larger garden come spring, and lumber for building a proper porch on the house. He also bought Faith a ring, a simple gold band that cost him a week's wages, but was worth every penny when he saw her face light up. On Saturday morning, Faith woke with butterflies in her stomach. She bathed and dressed with care, pinning up her hair and putting on the blue dress she had made. When she emerged from the house, Marcus was waiting by the wagon, and the look on his face made her feel like the most beautiful woman in the world. Faith, he breathed. You are radiant. You cleaned up pretty well yourself, she said, taking in his pressed shirt and string tie. They rode into Lordsburg together, the morning sun warm on their faces. The ceremony took place in the small church at the edge of town. Reverend Matthews performed the service with warmth and sincerity. A few townspeople attended, curious about the union between the solitary homesteader and the cowboy who had moved onto her land. But Faith barely noticed anyone except Marcus. When Reverend Matthews asked if Marcus would take Faith as his wife, his "I do" rang out strong and clear. And when it was Faith's turn, she looked into Marcus's eyes and said, "I do," with her whole heart. "By the power vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife. Marcus, you may kiss your bride." Marcus gathered Faith into his arms and kissed her thoroughly, to the cheers of the small congregation. When they broke apart, both grinning, Faith felt like she could float away with happiness. They spent their wedding night in the house that was now truly theirs, making love for the first time as husband and wife. Marcus was gentle and patient, treating Faith like she was made of something precious. And Faith gave herself to him completely, holding nothing back. It was beautiful and overwhelming and perfect. In the weeks and months that followed, they built a life together. Marcus continued working for the Bar T, but he spent every spare moment improving their homestead. He built a proper chicken coop, expanded the garden, and constructed a small barn for the 2 horses they now owned. He was good with his hands, able to fix anything that broke and build whatever they needed. Faith kept the house and tended the garden, but she also learned to help Marcus with the heavier work. She learned to string fence wire and stack hay. She learned to ride better, so she could help move cattle when the Bar T needed extra hands. She grew stronger and more confident, thriving in her new life as Marcus's wife. They talked often about Ezra Sullivan, the man whose death had brought them together. It seemed important to honor his memory, to remember that something beautiful had grown from tragedy. Marcus carved a wooden marker and they placed it on the spot where Ezra had died, a simple cross with his name and dates. Then, in January of 1883, a letter arrived from Philadelphia. It was from Elizabeth Sullivan, Ezra's daughter. She wrote, "Dear Mr. Tanner and Miss Morrison, I cannot adequately express my gratitude for your kindness to my father in his final moments. Reading your account of how Miss Morrison sat with him, holding his hand and giving him comfort, brought me both tears and peace. I have always regretted the distance between us, the years I spent angry at him for leaving to seek his fortune in the West. Your letter helped me understand that he thought of me at the end, that he regretted not telling me he loved me more often. That knowledge is a gift beyond measure. I am writing to let you know that I have claimed my father's mining stake as you suggested. The vein of silver is indeed substantial, and I have decided to have it worked by a reputable mining company. The profits will be considerable, and I want to share them with you. My father would want the people who showed him kindness to be rewarded. I am having my lawyer in Santa Fe draw up papers that will provide you with a monthly payment from the mine proceeds for as long as it produces. It is the least I can do to thank you for giving my father dignity and comfort in his final moments. With deepest gratitude and respect, Elizabeth Sullivan." Faith and Marcus sat in stunned silence after reading the letter. A monthly payment from a silver mine would change their lives completely. It would mean security, the ability to expand the homestead, a cushion against the harsh realities of life in the territory. "We cannot accept this," Faith said, though her voice was uncertain. "It is too much." Marcus read the letter again, then looked at his wife. "Faith, you gave that man something priceless. You gave him comfort and kindness when he was dying. His daughter wants to honor that. I think we should accept with gratitude and use the money to build something good, something that would make Ezra Sullivan proud." Faith thought about that, about the man who had died in her arms, about his last words. "All right, but I want to use some of it to help others. Maybe we could help other single women trying to homestead or families who are struggling. Pass on the kindness." Marcus pulled her into his arms. "That is exactly what I would expect you to say, and it is exactly what we will do." The payments from the Sullivan mine began arriving in February. True to Elizabeth's word, they were substantial. Marcus was able to quit his job with the Bar T and devote himself full-time to their homestead. He expanded the garden to 3 times its original size and bought cattle to start a small herd. He built a proper house with multiple rooms, keeping the original adobe structure as a storage building. But they also kept Faith's promise. They helped neighboring families, providing loans to those who needed seed or livestock, helping widows keep their land, offering work to men who were down on their luck. Their generosity became known throughout the area, and people started calling them the Good Samaritans of Lordsburg. In the summer of 1883, Faith discovered she was pregnant. She told Marcus one evening as they sat on the porch he had built, watching the sun set over their thriving homestead. He was so overcome with joy that he swept her up in his arms and spun her around, both of them laughing. "Careful," Faith said, though she was grinning. "You will make me dizzy." "I am going to be a father," Marcus said wonderingly. "We are going to have a baby." The pregnancy was not easy. Faith suffered from terrible morning sickness in the first few months, and the desert heat in late summer was brutal. But Marcus was attentive and caring, doing everything he could to make her comfortable. He hired a woman from town, Mrs. Garcia, to help with the heavy housework. He brought Faith anything she craved, rode into town for the doctor at the slightest concern. Their son was born in March of 1884, a healthy baby with his father's dark hair and his mother's warm eyes. They named him Ezra Marcus Tanner in honor of the man who had inadvertently brought them together. Faith held her son in the rocking chair Marcus had built for her, tears streaming down her face. "He is perfect." Marcus knelt beside them, his hand gentle on the baby's head. "He is a miracle." "You are both miracles." Life settled into a new rhythm with baby Ezra. The homestead continued to thrive. Their cattle herd grew, their garden produced bountifully, and the payments from the Sullivan mine kept coming, providing more than enough for their needs and their charitable work. When Ezra was 6 months old, they received another letter from Elizabeth Sullivan. She wrote that she was married now, to a good man who supported her desire to honor her father's memory. She was expecting her first child and hoped that someday their families might meet. She also mentioned that the mine was producing even better than expected, and she was increasing their monthly payment. Faith wrote back immediately, congratulating Elizabeth and sharing news of their own son. A correspondence began between the two women, letters crossing the country regularly, sharing their lives and building a friendship based on the connection to Ezra Sullivan. Time passed in the way it does, marked by seasons and growth. Ezra grew from a baby into a toddler, then a little boy. He had his mother's kind heart and his father's steady temperament. When he was 3, Faith gave birth to a daughter they named Grace. 2 years after that, another daughter came whom they called Hope. The homestead that had started as a struggle to survive became a true ranch. Marcus proved to have a talent for breeding cattle, and the Tanner herd became known for producing strong, healthy stock. They hired hands to help with the work, providing good wages and fair treatment. Several families settled nearby, drawn by the Tanners' reputation for helping newcomers get established. Lordsburg grew too, becoming less wild and more civilized as the years passed. In 1888, Marcus was elected to the town council, and he used his position to push for a school and better roads. Faith started a women's group that met monthly to share skills and support each other. She taught sewing and gardening and learned butter making and cheese making from the other women. On the 10th anniversary of the day they met, Marcus and Faith rode out to the spot where Ezra Sullivan had died. The wooden marker was weathered but still standing. They had brought flowers from Faith's garden, bright blooms that seemed impossible in the harsh desert. "You ever think about how different our lives would be if I had not heard that gunshot?" Faith asked as they stood hand in hand. "Every day," Marcus said. "I think about how I almost did not ride out that night. I was tired, ready to head back to the bunkhouse, but something told me to check on those buzzards." He turned to face her. "Your kindness to a dying stranger changed everything, Faith. It brought me to you, showed me what true goodness looks like. You made me want to be a better man." Faith squeezed his hand. "You made me want to live again, not just survive. After my parents died, I was so lonely. I kept going because I am stubborn, but I was not really living. You brought joy back into my life." They stood there for a long time, remembering. Then Marcus pulled a letter from his pocket. "This came yesterday. I wanted to wait until today to share it with you." It was from Ezra Sullivan. She wrote that the mine had finally played out after 11 years of steady production. She and her husband had invested the proceeds wisely, and her family was secure. But she wanted to make one final gesture of gratitude. She had used some of the last of the mine profits to establish a fund in her father's name. The Ezra Sullivan Memorial Fund would provide assistance to families homesteading in New Mexico Territory, administered by Marcus and Faith Tanner. "She trusts us to carry on his legacy," Faith said, tears in her eyes, "to help others the way we have been helped." "We will do it justice," Marcus promised. "We will make sure his name is associated with kindness and second chances." They kept that promise. The Sullivan Fund helped dozens of families over the years, providing the difference between failure and success for homesteaders struggling in the harsh territory. Marcus and Faith became pillars of their community, known for their generosity and fairness. Their children grew up hearing the story of how their parents met, about the dying stranger and the woman who sat with him, about the cowboy who saw that kindness and offered his whole life in response. Young Ezra understood the weight of his name, the responsibility of being named after a man whose death had brought so much good into the world. Grace and Hope learned from their parents' example, growing into compassionate young women who looked for ways to help others. As New Mexico moved toward statehood in the early 1900s, the Tanner Ranch was one of the most respected operations in the territory. But Marcus and Faith never forgot where they came from, never forgot the hard times that had shaped them. They kept the original adobe house standing, a reminder of Faith's first years alone. They kept the wooden marker for Ezra Sullivan maintained and fresh. And every year on the anniversary of the day they met, they rode out to that spot and remembered. In the summer of 1912, 30 years after they met, Marcus and Faith celebrated with a gathering at the ranch. Their children were grown now. Ezra was 28 and running the cattle operation with his father. Grace, at 25, had married a schoolteacher and was raising a family in Lordsburg. Hope, 23, had surprised everyone by becoming a nurse and moving to Santa Fe to work in a hospital there. The family gathered on the porch Marcus had built so many years ago, now expanded and improved but still fundamentally the same. Grandchildren ran in the yard, playing the same games their parents had played. Elizabeth Sullivan had come from Philadelphia with her own grown children, finally making the trip west she had talked about for years. "I wanted to see where my father died," Elizabeth said as Faith showed her around, "and to meet the people who have done so much good in his name." They took her to the marker, this Eastern woman in her fine dress picking her way carefully through the desert scrub. When she saw the cross with her father's name, she wept. Faith put an arm around her, and the two women stood together, connected by the man they had both loved. "He would be proud," Elizabeth said. "Proud of everything you have done, all the people you have helped. You turned his death into something meaningful." "He gave us each other," Faith said simply. "That is everything." That evening, as the sun set in a blaze of orange and gold, Marcus and Faith sat in their favorite spot on the porch. They could hear laughter from inside where the family was gathered, smell the food cooking for dinner. Marcus reached for Faith's hand, and she laced her fingers through his like she had done thousands of times before. "Are you happy?" Marcus asked. Faith looked at him, at the man who had offered her his whole life after seeing her show kindness to a dying stranger. His hair was gray now, his face lined with years of sun and wind. But his eyes still held the same warmth, the same love that had been there from the beginning. "I am more than happy. I am blessed beyond measure. We took tragedy and turned it into something beautiful. We built a family, helped our community, lived a life of purpose and meaning." She leaned her head on his shoulder. "I would not change a single thing." Marcus kissed the top of her head. "Neither would I. That moment when I came over the rise and saw you kneeling beside Ezra Sullivan, holding his hand, I knew you were special. I just did not know how special. How could I know that you would become my whole world?" "I think he brought us together," Faith said softly. "Ezra Sullivan. I think his death was not meaningless because it led to so much life and love. We honored him by building something good." As the stars began to appear in the vast New Mexico sky, Marcus and Faith sat together in comfortable silence. They had weathered droughts and difficulties, celebrated triumphs and mourned losses. But through it all, they had faced life together, two people bound by love that had grown from a single act of compassion. Inside, their family called them to dinner. Marcus stood and helped Faith to her feet, and hand in hand they walked into the house full of the people they loved. The laughter and warmth that greeted them was a testament to the life they had built, to the love that had started on a desert evening beside a dying man. Years continued to pass, marking the slow and steady rhythm of a life well lived. Marcus and Faith watched their children have children of their own, watched the ranch continue to thrive under Ezra's capable management. They saw New Mexico achieve statehood in 1912, witnessed the changes that came with the new century. On the 40th anniversary of the day they met, in 1922, they rode out to Ezra Sullivan's marker one more time. Marcus was 70 now, Faith 62. The ride was harder than it used to be, their bodies protesting the distance. But it was important to them, this pilgrimage they made every year. The wooden marker had been replaced with stone, a proper monument funded by Elizabeth Sullivan before her death 2 years earlier. It read, "Ezra Sullivan, 1828–1882. His death brought life and love. In his memory, kindness continues." Faith placed flowers on the stone, standing slowly. Marcus wrapped an arm around her waist, supporting her as much as embracing her. They stood in silence, remembering everything that had grown from this spot. "You think we would have found each other without him?" Faith asked. Marcus considered the question seriously. "I do not know, maybe, but I think we found each other because of who you are, Faith. Your kindness drew me to you, made me see what really matters in life. That has always been you." They rode home slowly, savoring the journey. When they arrived, the sun was setting, painting the ranch in shades of gold and crimson. Their family was gathered, having come to celebrate the anniversary with them. Grandchildren and great-grandchildren ran through the yard. The house was full of life and laughter. That night, lying in bed beside the man she had loved for 40 years, Faith felt profound gratitude wash over her. She had started with so little, a young woman alone on a harsh homestead. One act of compassion, sitting with a dying stranger, had changed everything. It had brought her Marcus, whose love had sustained her through 4 decades. It had given her children and grandchildren a legacy of kindness that would outlive them both. "I love you," she whispered into the darkness. Marcus pulled her close, his arms still strong despite his age. "I love you too, forever and always." They lived another decade together, side by side through all of life's joys and sorrows. When Marcus died peacefully in his sleep in 1932, at the age of 80, Faith held his hand just as she had held Ezra Sullivan's hand 50 years earlier. She whispered her love to him, told him about the life they had built together, thanked him for every moment. Faith lived 2 more years after Marcus's death, spending her days with family and continuing the charitable work that had defined their marriage. She died in the spring of 1934, surrounded by children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren. Her last words were about Marcus, about the love that had sustained her entire adult life. They buried Faith beside Marcus on a hill overlooking the ranch, the land they had built together. On their shared headstone, their children inscribed words that captured the essence of their love story. Marcus and Faith Tanner. Their love grew from kindness, sustained through devotion, and lives on in the hearts of all who knew them. Not far away, the stone marker for Ezra Sullivan stood as it had for decades, a reminder that even in death, there can be meaning. That one moment of compassion can ripple outward, touching lives in ways impossible to predict. The homestead Faith had struggled to maintain alone became a thriving ranch that supported multiple families. The Sullivan Fund continued to help homesteaders for another generation. And the story of the woman who sat with a dying stranger, and the cowboy whose heart was captured by her kindness, became part of the fabric of Lordsburg, passed down through generations as an example of the best of what people could be. The great-grandchildren who heard the story understood that love could grow from the smallest seeds, that kindness mattered, that the legacy of a good life extended far beyond the years of living it. They learned that their great-grandmother had shown mercy to a dying man and gained everything. They learned that their great-grandfather had seen that mercy and recognized it as the most beautiful thing in the world. And they learned that, from tragedy and death, life and love could bloom like flowers in the desert, bright and beautiful and enduring. The ranch continued through the generations, always carrying the Tanner name, always maintaining the tradition of helping others that Marcus and Faith had established. The original adobe house was preserved as a historical site, a reminder of where it all began. Visitors came to hear the story, to stand in the place where a young widow had tried to carve out a life alone, where a cowboy had fallen in love with kindness itself. In the years after their deaths, when people spoke of Marcus and Faith Tanner, they spoke of a love that had been rare and true. They spoke of 2 people who had turned a chance meeting beside a dying man into a legacy of compassion that outlasted them both. They spoke of how Faith's simple act of sitting with a stranger, refusing to let him die alone in the desert, had been the foundation of everything that followed. And late at night, when the wind blew across the New Mexico plains, if you listened carefully, you might hear echoes of their story. The sound of a dying man's last words, the hoofbeats of a cowboy riding to investigate, a woman's gentle voice offering comfort. 2 people falling in love under a desert moon, children's laughter, the steady building of a life day by day, year by year, a love story that began with an act of mercy and ended only when death could no longer be held at bay. But even then, even after both were gone, the love persisted. In the land they had tended, in the children and grandchildren who carried their values forward, in the families who had been helped by the Sullivan Fund, in the collective memory of a community that had witnessed something special. Marcus and Faith Tanner's love story became legend, a reminder that in the harsh and beautiful American West, among all the violence and difficulty, there was also room for profound kindness, for a love so deep and true that it transformed everyone it touched. And it all began with a woman who heard a gunshot and ran toward it instead of away. A woman who sat in the desert dirt holding the hand of a dying stranger, giving him the gift of not facing death alone. That simple act of compassion, that choice to show mercy when it would have been easier to turn away, became the cornerstone of a love that lasted a lifetime and a legacy that lasted even longer. The story of Marcus and Faith Tanner, of Ezra Sullivan whose death brought them together, and of the life they built from that tragic beginning, became one of those rare tales that captures something essential about the human spirit. It showed that even in the hardest places, even in times of violence and struggle, kindness matters. Love matters. And sometimes, if you are very lucky, a single moment of compassion can change everything, can offer not just comfort to a dying stranger but hope and love, and a future bright with promise to those left behind.